why do you not feel as though sponsorships could ever grow beyond 25% of your income?
So I'm worried that if I really want to go hard at sponsorships, their danger is I would move from having a valuable audience to having a big audience, which is only valuable for running ads and sponsorships.
I think that's wrong. I fundamentally think that's wrong.
Okay. Well, I think you're wrong.
If I were you, I would look at your primary content format like your podcast as a Trojan horse to get into these brands, to start unpacking what's actually important to them.
And first of all, as good as your hair is, not just a home for hair gel, my friend. Well done. Hey, I'm Jay Acunzo, and I am the inspiration for all things facial hair and cranial hair for Justin Moore. But when I'm not giving him a hard time about that, I also consult entrepreneurs and creators who sell high-ticket services to help them develop stronger IP, so they have a little bit of an easier time differentiating and charging a premium.
Wow, I don't even know how to respond to that intro. That's amazing. Why are you here today, Jay? Sounds like you're working on some exciting new projects.
Yes.
And sponsorships are top of mind for you.
Yes. So I am launching a new podcast after years of running one that was sort of a relic from my speaking business, because for many years I was doing the author speaker thing, and that was honestly the bulk of my income. And so sponsorship sort of came my way accidentally because I had a lot of connections to like B2B SaaS companies or startups that were looking for advantages by partnering with creators. And so I'd worked with some sponsors, but it was kind of reactive. And like I got to the point where I had a deck that felt effective and above average. But now the new show is How Stories Happen. It's launching this spring. I have a whole lot planned around it. It's a pretty big swing. It's also a lot more in line with my business. And I'm off the road a lot more. I'm not speaking quite as much. So consulting and memberships have been the big sources of my income sans speaking, but sponsorships is quickly catching up. So I'm like currently, as we speak today, facing a problem, which is I don't know how to make this run smoothly and scale it. I have a bunch of sponsors that I've won, which is wonderful. And now I'm like in service to those sponsorships and trying to continue to win sponsorships and grow those relationships. And I'm like seeing how this can easily balloon in a bad way and get away from me. So I'm like trying to mitigate or hedge against like looming stress.
Got it. So it's not that wheels have fallen off quite yet, but you're concerned that they might.
Yeah, like when I'm doing custom packages for sponsors, which I fully believe in, and I know you do too. At what point do you tip from I'm doing some custom things for sponsors to now these sponsors are clients and not repeatable clients necessarily? You know, how custom is too custom? How do you like once they're in motion, you're on the hook for ensuring they show up at the right times in the right places all across your platform. So like there's the execution, let's call that like sponsorship OS of like how I'm running like the operating system of that. But then there's also this looming issue I've recognized because as a creative and someone who's been public facing in B2B for a while, I can see how people really like when I do custom things. And I'm starting to get requests to do more, but I can see how that can like pull me away from both the execution of my show and my newsletter and all my creative projects and servicing the actual clients that I have. Because that's not what I want sponsors to be. I want them to be actual sponsors, not clients. So hopefully that made sense.
It does make sense. Okay, so let me tell you how I do it in my business because it's kind of meta because I have sponsorships, even though I'm a sponsorship coach. I have sponsorships for Creator Wizard as well. And to be totally candid, I could not do it by myself. Like there's so many moving pieces. I have the newsletter sponsored, you know, the YouTube channel, my live streams, like in every single day, it seems like there's like different things going live and it's very overwhelming to be honest. And so a decision that I made before I turned the switch on sponsorships, because, you know, 12 months ago or so, I wasn't doing sponsorships, right? This is a relatively new income stream for me. And so I knew that because I'm doing so many things and the coaching and the courses and all that stuff too, I knew that I had to assign or delegate essentially operational control over to not me, basically, right? And so it was at that point that I decided to essentially promote one of my key colleagues to run it, basically, run kind of the operational side of sponsorships. And so I think the first decision that you need to make is how much sponsorships do you want to do? Because that may inform whether you think you can actually do it yourself. So I think that it's kind of hard to know in the short term until you try and service it yourself. So maybe some of these initial clients that you have, you know, seems like you're inking these deals with, you try and do it yourself. And while you're kind of juggling everything and see like, okay, like, is this going to work out? Is it not? Like, I guess we're going to see. And then maybe you need to make the determination like, okay, maybe I need to hire like a VA or, you know, a virtual assistant to like help with like empty logistics, right? Of
Right,
like,
right.
oh, this sponsor emailed and they want new copy for like the sponsorship that's going live on this date or whatever. And they're like liaising with that person. Like this is real stuff. And if you drop the ball on any of this stuff, it can have really dire, consequences of like the health of the relationship. And so I don't know, where does your mind go there in terms of like what your threshold is of like what you can and can't handle?
It's a good question. I'm with you on, and this is how I generally operate. It's like I have to sort of like muck around and mess around and like slog through the mud first before I get on firm ground and can run again. And like part of that means taking on more of the project management and logistics and all the execution part of this stuff. Like I was just pulling up my numbers as you were speaking, and it's like right now 17% of my income booked for the year is sponsorships. And I'd like to grow that over 20, maybe 25%. I don't think it'll ever be the lion's share. It's always going to be client services first, and then sort of behind that, the membership group that I run, the Creator Kitchen. And then speaking is kind of moving over to like opportunistic, where if I get inbound requests for full fee gigs, I'll negotiate both with the sponsor, but also with my wife, who has a very demanding career, and we have 2 demanding kids at home. So like, I'm not trying to leave a ton. So I'm like sort of mentally just putting speaking to the side. So if I think of like the portfolio of things, if I really want to justify sponsorship growing, I'm almost in like a good position now, I think, where, I pitched 5 to start the year for this new show launch. And it's always one at a time. It's an exclusive sponsorship. There's some overlap just to avoid like listener and audience fatigue, where you hear about the same brand over and over again. So there's some overlap, but I'm never doing like back-to-back ad spots in an episode, for example. So anytime I show up, it's always one sponsor, and I'm booking, like 1 or 2 overlapped at a time. It'd be great to sell out for the year, but at least right now I'm working with 2. And so it sounds like the best move, or maybe the first 2 moves, is figure out what's too much, what's working, document things as I execute right now with these 2 sponsors. And then behind that, prepare to bring on someone to maybe handle some of the logistics to free me up to do creative and maybe more pitching. So that's how I made sense of everything you were saying.
This is one of the reasons why I designed this like really robust sponsorship tracker template in Notion for my course Brand Deal Wizard. Is I found that this over the years, I found that, like you said, like we're never just working with like one brand at a time. It's always like one brand, and they're at different phases of the qualification process, right?
Yeah.
Some is in the pitching phase, some you're negotiating, some you're in the fulfillment phase, and et cetera, et cetera. And it's very easy to lose track of the timelines and like what's due and like all this stuff. And so designing this template that, provides prompts of like, okay, this is the date you need to like follow up on this pitch, or this is the date that you need to follow, deliver the concept or the rough script for the ad read to this client or whatever, that could really help to have systems and processes in place to help you track this stuff rather than having it in your brain. So that's number one. The second thing, just real quickly, I want to challenge you on something that you said, which is, why do you not feel as though sponsorships could ever grow beyond 25% of your income?
I think I'm worried about, it's a good prompt, because the audience, so I've surveyed my audience and talked to them, and I've gotten tons of screenshots of qualitative feedback, and it's all in the pitch deck and all these things. The reason sponsors are excited to work with me is they understand I reach a discerning, like, economic buyer. Like, a lot of people who talk about business or career related topics, they're so excited to reach the most possible people that like 100 out of a possible 100 is their goal with their content. And I'm like, 1 out of 100 sounds not so great, but if the 1 is the buyer, if the 1 is the CEO of the company, if the 1 is the influential individual, if the 1 is the author who is like shifting the tide of how work gets done in a certain niche, like, you can influence the entire market by influencing the influential, right? So that's kind of always how I showed up and challenged a lot of the bottom of the pyramid kind of thinking. 101 level advice and basic tips and tricks and all that's not what I do. I'm worried that were I to try to grow sponsorship to be something I'm overly reliant on, it would subtly and maybe not so subtly influence me to start thinking about like total reach numbers, where every individual is kind of created equal in my audience because they're trying to reach a ton of folks and get in front of a massive audience, versus harmonizing the client services I offer and make most of my money through. These are people that are like pretty experienced entrepreneurs and creators. They sell high ticket things. Maybe they're an executive in-house, but they're investing in their personal brand and working with me on that. Like, these people are not everywhere. There's a few of them, but they're all very valuable. So I'm worried that like, if I really want to go hard at sponsorships, The danger is, and please challenge me on this, I would move from having a valuable audience to having a big audience, which is only valuable for running ads and sponsorships, not valuable for all the other things I'm also selling.
I think that's wrong. I fundamentally think that's wrong.
Okay. Well, I think
because
I think you're wrong. Okay.
That's why you're here, right? Well, here's the deal. I think that is a block, probably, because that assumes that the only thing that those potential sponsors care about is reach and numbers. And I would argue that given the persona of your audience, of the customer, the client that you're reaching, and given that they're a discerning consumer, that is a different audience than just a random lifestyle influencer. You're speaking to a different person, a different type of a buyer of a B2B SaaS tool or something like that, right?
Yeah, like my current two sponsors, one is a tool that helps you do market research, and then the other is a content creation tool meant for teams or people who are like really robust individuals, like people who are really experienced. And like, so these people are like, they see direct value in my audience because they're like, the numbers are gravy. Like when I quote, even in the deck that I use, the reach numbers are pretty late in the positioning of it all, because it's much more about like, who are these people? Also all the screenshots and praise about like how engaged they are, what brands they work for, or how many years experience they have, or all the BS out in the industry they tell me they don't like, and that's why they like my work. Like late in the deck is reach numbers. So it does line up with my experience right now that they don't want total reach when they work with me. They want affinity and perception and reaching an economic buyer and all those things.
I think you also have a unique superpower, which is Jay the speaker, Jay the incredible storyteller, Jay the person who's able to translate the mission and values and ethos of some of these boring brands into something that an everyday discerning decision maker at an organization could understand why they'd want to purchase something like that. And that's really hard to find partners who can do something like that. And it's different. B2B, I kind of look at you as like a B2B influencer more than kind of like a lifestyle influencer, right? And like, it's just a fundamentally different strategy when you're trying to do B2B influencer marketing, basically, which is what you're pitching to these sponsors. There's just less people. There's less people out there to hire. And so you're, to some degree, their options, we talk about this concept of like a BATNA, right? The best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right? Both sides have this, right? It's the fundamental negotiation principle. It's like, okay, if they are not going to hire Jay, who else are they going to hire? Yeah, there's other podcasts out there. Yeah, there's other people, but is there really like an infinite pool? Not really. There's not an infinite pool. Are there really? Because I've seen your pitch deck. I've seen your pitch, like website that you these bespoke proposals that you design. Are there really a lot of other people doing this level of tailoring to the way in which they're going to bring a campaign to life? Probably not, right? And so are there really other people out there who we'd feel comfortable having do a webinar on our behalf, emailing our entire customer base of 100,000 people of our SaaS and telling them we're going to do this thing with Jay Acunzo and it's going to be really cool? Are there really a lot of people out? No, I would say the answer is no. And so I would actually argue that going harder on sponsorships and pushing that to 40-50% of your income wouldn't actually mean a linear increase in the deliverables that would be required, the more podcast ad reads or things like that. There's other types of things that you could do for some of these sponsors that it's not a direct apples to apples, like more deliverables that you're required to create.
I would love if you tell me more about that, because you just headed me off at the pass. Where I was going was, I'm worried about the repercussions and how I go about building my audience and showing up in the world, but I'm less worried about that because that's ultimately a choice I'm making. And I'm much more worried about, now I'm on the hook for, what could be lighter weight on any one sponsorship package basis deliverables, but adding more overall, that pie starts to get a little bit too big for me and pulls me away from doing the creative work that got me here, from helping with clients who are spending a lot more money to work with me as a behind the scenes consultant and, advocate for them. And so talk to me more about that, about how what you see is not me. Because right now I'm doing the basic expected ad spots. Right. I'm also doing like custom videos, for example, where I'm like learning about their product and using it for my workflow. I have pitched, and though these two aren't doing it, but I've pitched other sponsors and they were like, oh, that's interesting, about doing some kind of like mini series together within my content. And I could see how that's a little bit more in harmony with where I want to go. But there's other bespoke things I know I could do. So yeah, talk to me more about that, how I'm not just like chaining myself to a growing mountain of assets I'm on the hook to deliver for sponsors.
If I were you, I would look at your primary content format, like your podcast, as a Trojan horse to get into these brands, to you have a where in your trench coat to be like, look what I got, right? And they're like, oh, that's interesting. Let me see what you got. But then that's the excuse. That's the reason for you to start having a conversation, to start unpacking what's actually important to them. Right? Because you come inbound assuming something, right? Based on your research, because we've talked offline about how to do that, right? And get them excited. But in reality, every brand is going to have different priorities, different quarterly objectives, different annual objectives. They have different KPIs. They have different budgets allocated to each of those initiatives. And so you may come inbound on an initial discovery call about a sponsorship, and they actually tell you something completely orthogonal, something out of left field. And they're like, actually, I know you talked to us about this, but like, here's this other big thing that we're launching this big feature, or we're launching in a new territory, or we're launching whatever, they're doing something, or we've got these competitive headwinds or supply chain issues or whatever, right? Every brand has something different. And so it actually takes you having that conversation for you to be like, oh, well, that's really good to know. Well, here's why I think you should have me come in and do a $10,000 consulting thing for your marketing team. So in addition to the podcast,
right?
But it's like, here's why I think you should have a podcast for yourself the brand owns, or here's why you should be, doing this training. I could do this, custom workshop for your employees about this very specific issue, and I would argue that you probably have given someone of your back catalog, you've done so much, you have so much writing, you've done so much training, you've worked with a lot of clients. And so I would argue that probably it wouldn't require spinning up something entirely new. You can probably repurpose a lot of what you've already done over the years for your clients. And so it's kind of a packaging exercise of like, hey, This reminds me of how I helped this other client. I think I can, help you in a similar way. And so I don't know exactly what the deliverable is. It's more just about having a mindset of flexibility and creativity to be like, okay, yeah, this now becomes, instead of a 10K thing, this becomes a 30K thing because of these other ways in which I can serve you, which, by the way, are aligned with their own budgets. That's the whole point, is like realizing like, oh, you have a budget for that? Oh, good to know, because I can help you do that.
Right, because they're hiring consultants, and they're hiring a podcast production company, or they're hiring somebody who helps with their messaging, and they're thinking about their homepage, or they're hiring somebody to take this executive from smart expert to known influencer. Like, they're doing all these things that look like on the side of or completely separate from sponsorships, which I can essentially point to and say, like, yes, I also do these things incredibly well, and I have all the IP for it and the frameworks for it and all these things. A friend of mine likes to say, the cobbler's kids have no shoes. We've all heard that phrase. It's like, make up an example. I help people with sponsorships, but I myself have no sponsorships, right? Well, it's like, I help people with content. I have the opposite problem. It's not that I have no content. It's that I'm always creating net new content and looking in the back catalog of what have I made? What frameworks do I have? What methodologies do I use to help with clients? What you're proposing is, in the pitches moving forward, I can include at least one package, if not more, of, yes, there's the expected sponsorships thing, but there's also the custom content, but there's also advisory and consulting and things like that bundled up in there. So that doesn't cannibalize my client services. Actually, they become a pseudo client, is what you're saying.
Exactly. And it can be lead generation, basically, right? And it's like, I think a lot of people don't think of sponsorship. This is a sponsorship. It's like, that's not a sponsorship, but it absolutely is. You're helping the brand.
Stuff up. We're all like, it's a blank. We all live blank canvas careers, and then we get into the mode of something that's like tangential to our core thing. Like for me, sponsorships, and I'm like, how do I do paint by numbers instead? And what you're saying is like, no, it's still a blank canvas if you know all the different paints and tools you're working with here.
100%. And I think that I love talking to people like you, people who have backgrounds in marketing and sales and advertising and things like that in their corporate life or their past life or whatever. Because sometimes it just takes like me holding up a mirror to you and being like, you know this stuff, dude. Yeah. You know how to do consulting, you know how to do this type of stuff. And it's just a matter of realizing that it's a similar exercise when you are the creator, essentially, as what you may have been doing before. And again, at the end of the day, brands, they just want to solve their own problems. And so whether sponsoring your podcast is going to help them solve it, or whether, paying you to come in and do a session for their employees or whatever is going to solve it, you're not going to know until you really have a conversation.
Gosh, and you're making me think, man, look, first of all, for as good as your hair is, not just a home for hair gel, my friend, not just well done. You're making me think of my first sponsor that I won, this is pre-pandemic times, but I, had smaller audience than I have today and like had no experience with sponsorships, had been doing consulting of both entrepreneurs and marketing teams, right? And so I was like, okay, I can kind of leverage that muscle and ability. And I basically offered them an advisory call. I was like, for once a month for an hour, for the 3 months that you're sponsoring me, I will talk to your executive team. You can invite whoever you want. I basically said, as long as you don't publish this as public content, anybody at all that is important to you, like if you want, and this is what speakers do sometimes. Speakers often give the big stage keynotes when you're getting paid, you're on the main stage, you're like the fancy person they brought in. And then there's things around the event that help the client, like milling around the happy hour answering questions, or sitting down for an interview on the expo floor, or bringing together a bunch of VIP prospects and customers and having dinner with them, right? Like what you're saying is like, there's a bunch of stuff in my past that I could be just drawing on and including in these packages, because that is also sponsorship.
Yeah, 100%, man. I mean, I think that especially when we're launching a new thing, right? It feels like we have to invent new things to go alongside it.
Yeah,
we've got the new
that's
podcast.
the trap I fell into.
Yeah. And I think not to minimize the importance of the execution, because it absolutely is important, but I do think that, what's old is new. You have this, you have it in your tool belt. You have these arrows in your quiver. I don't think you have to overcomplicate this. Now, there are specific things and specific processes that you can employ when you're actually executing the partnership with them that will increase the chances of them wanting to continue to hire you. So we could chat about some of those, because I think that this is oftentimes overlooked. It's the least sexy part of sponsorships. Often it's like pitching, getting the deal, signing the deal, issuing the first invoice. That's really exciting, right? Like that's what everyone wants to talk about. But it's like, a lot of these brands, these companies, they have PTSD from working with people who are not professional, not communicative, people who create the work or the content or whatever, and it sucks. And then they ask people to edit stuff and they're like, no, you're ruining my creative vision, this type of idea. And so they're used to having this type of experience. So when I talk about my 8-step sponsorship wheel, there's 4 steps essentially that are related to the execution phase. So you've got the concept phase. We could talk, I'll talk about it real quick. We've got the concept, we've got produce, we've got feedback, and we've got publish. So let's talk real quickly about the concept phase. When you reach out to a sponsor, in your situation, you were the one proactively pitching this. And so they may not really have a quote unquote creative brief formalized. It's like, we don't have.
I'll correct that a little bit, actually. So in
please.
this case, I'm so, I don't want to say build in public, that's just fraught. But I'm always like, I'm a meta creator, right? Like I'm telling stories to and for people who want themselves to become better storytellers, right? Like I'm doing marketing and a lot of my audience is marketers. So a lot of people want what I made, but also how I made it. So as I'm starting to develop how stories happen, it's an excuse to basically like leak out over time pieces of the process. And so as I was doing that, one such update was like, it's getting really close. Here's this awesome cover art, and I'm seeking a launch sponsor. And I got like a flurry of inbound requests. So I did some cold outreach, and that led to some pitches. And those two, however, that I secured, they came sort of inbound to me, right? They saw the content, they saw me searching, they came to me and said, we're first in line, please work with us. So that was a little bit different than a straight cold pitch.
Yeah. Well, awesome. So did these, I'll just ask you, did these sponsors, did they have something formalized to be like, here's the 1-pager or the 2-pager, the key messages we want you to hit, the call to action we want you to say? Did they have something like that?
Oh, my friend, you have such high expectations of so many brands. Having been in-house working for brands, I'm like, that to me, that's what you should have, right? But no one I have worked with before has kind of come my way and said, look, we have a campaign or all these things. The closest is like a product launch, right? They're launching their new feature or new product entirely, like they're a startup on Product Hunt, or there's a big like V2 of the product coming up or something like that, right? But what's missing is, and here's some ad copy where we found success with other podcasters or newsletter writers, or so I'm having to sort of like, and it's not difficult for me, it's just another part of the process. Like, okay, here's a Google Doc and here's like a bunch of things, or, here's a form and can you fill this out or approve this stuff? It's like, I wish they were at the table with, and here's how we describe all of the things relevant to us that you then need to synthesize into your world, Jay.
This is a big thing, and this is a big caution, which is that if you are about to proceed with a sponsor, you even sign on the dotted line and they're just like, Jay, we trust you. We know about our brand and the value proposition, and just like do your thing. And so you say, oh, okay, awesome. This brand's giving me creative freedom. What ultimately can happen is that you execute the ad read or the content or whatever, and you deliver it to them and be like, this isn't what we had in mind at all. And they're like, you need to completely redo this. This sucks, right? And then now all of a sudden the relationship is somewhat soured and you haven't even gotten out of the starting gates. And so the exercise is always you submit a concept of how you're going to bring the partnership to life ahead of time before you do anything. And so like this is the concept phase in earnest, is like, getting buy-in from them and allowing them rounds of feedback on the concept itself before you do anything, because then you'll absolutely minimize the number of revisions that you'll have to do. They'll feel more bought in on the creative vision as well. And oh wow, we've got to like get our fingers into like how he actually talks about this. That's such a critical thing. And so if you haven't done that yet, I would absolutely implore you to do that.
Yeah, no, it's something where in the negotiation, in the pitch process, and then like immediately post sale, that's coming out, right? It's not readily prepared for me. It's not, there's some brands in my pipeline where they work with a lot of creators and they've done a lot of sponsorships of like media companies and events and all these things. And they kind of have this collateral like ready to go. And they're like, we have this big campaign coming out. Here are all the key talking points. Here are some examples of like what other creators have done for us. For the most part, those are the larger brands at the table. The sweet spot for me is definitely like folks looking for unfair advantages. Because especially in B2B, you get your behemoth software companies like your Salesforces and stuff like that. Then you get a bunch of tiny little startups and maybe they don't have real revenue yet, or they're just kind of bootstrapped or VC funded. And then the sweet spot is these like challenger scale ups where they're super creative, but that creativity, it has not really translated into a ton of partnerships. And so when they see the opportunity, they're more open to it. And I can like broker relationships with them really easily. But then when it's time to like get away from pure like what could be territory and be like, now I have to deliver on your behalf,
right,
they're less organized. And so I find some of the stress of that organization is now falling to me. And so maybe that's why I'm like, it's only going to be 25% of my revenue, because if it was 50, I would just like lose all my hair, and then Justin and I would have no inside joke about our hair anymore, and I would be sad.
No, I would come out ahead. So maybe, really increase your sponsorship flow there, Jay. I think you're absolutely right, and this is why you have to design systems to it's a checklist. It's like, okay, where's the creative brief? If they don't have it, here, fill it out. You need this type of thing. It is their job. It's not your job. You got to tell me like what are the key messages, and if they send you back a litany of 50 background on their company since 1863, you're gonna be like, okay, I need the top 3 most important key benefits of this software, not the entire backstory of the company. So yes, of course, that's gonna be a process. I want to skip over real quickly the produce step, because I think you're solid on that, as well as feedback. You have low ego, you have objectivity. If they come back and they say, hey, you got to change this, you're going to work with them to actually do it. What I do want to real quickly call out though is on the publish step. This is one area of the execution phase that people screw up a lot. They think, oh yeah, just publish it, no big deal, this type of thing. But if you do not have a concrete checklist, essentially, of all the things that you need to do to ensure that the campaign actually performs well, this is the number one opportunity, the low-hanging fruit to optimize for, to ensure that they hire you again. And so the work that you need to do in advance is twofold. Number one, ensure that if you are going to be driving somewhere, a landing page, an opt-in form, something like that you do some sort of advanced work to give them feedback on that landing page, to say, this is confusing. The copy on here sucks. I don't think when I send my audience to this, they're going to really understand what the offer is, or it's not going to be compelling. Maybe there's there's actually some objections to the product or service that your audience might have, because you embody the persona of your audience, right? And that like you're landing on here and you're being like, I don't know, I've never tried this before and it sucked or whatever, right? So you have your own, consumer psychology around whether you're going to purchase something or not. And so you need to be cycling that feedback to the brand and saying like, hey, I actually think we need to change this. We need to change the landing page because I don't think it's going to go well. An example I can share here is I did a recent partnership with a brand, and they were just driving to the normal, they said, okay, yeah, drive people to the normal landing page of our site. And I was just like, I don't think this is going to do well because it's not geared towards creators. It's not, they're not going to really identify with the vocabulary that's being used on your main landing page. And so I said, we need a vanity page. We need brand.com/creatorwizard. And I'm going to film a video. This was not part of the agreement, but I was like, I'm going to film a 5-minute video, like walkthrough of me, how I use the software as a creator. And below the video, I want you to put the 3 key benefits or whatever that I use as a creator. And they're like, wow, this is amazing, this type of thing, right? And so we were able to, it delayed the launch a little bit, but we were able to spin up this page, and ultimately the campaign performed way better. It's these types of extra touches that you can implement as part of your execution process that's going to, number one, differentiate you from every other podcaster that they're working with or creator. And it's going to they're going to want to hire you again because it went better. There's more conversions, there's more performance. And so landing page optimization is one thing, and then engineering a win for your audience. This is another really big important factor, which is that, I talk a lot about how sponsorship should be win-win-win, right? Obviously, most people think it's win-win, right? You're getting paid and the brand gets to access a big pool of prospective customers, obviously, right? But it's that last win. It's like your audience has to win. If there's no promo code, discount code, they're not excited about, it's like a brand new product they've never seen or whatever, this may require you to engineer some sort of component of the deal in the negotiation such that your audience will be winning. So maybe the deal is like 10K plus 30% recurring commissions of signups or something. Maybe it's like a hybrid type compensation. And there's no incentive for your audience that you're discussing. Well, you need to come back to them and be like, I really think that we need to restructure this. I'm excited about this, but I want my audience to win. I want them to be so stoked out of their mind about this that they sign up for it right away. So instead of 10K plus 30% commission, I'm okay doing 10K plus 15% recurring commission. And I want to provide my audience a 15% discount code. Would you be willing to agree to that? That is a game changer because the brand now is like, wow, like this person's willing to like forego compensation so that we really ensure that this campaign performs well. And so you can be really creative with the types of deal structures that you negotiate. But again, what you'll notice is that this is something you have to think about way far in advance of the actual fulfillment, because you don't want to have to go back and like renegotiate something and ask, well, like, oh, can you give me a discount code? Because that throws off the financial calculus for the brand if they're having to offer additional discount codes beyond what they paid you.
And it makes sense because, especially at the stage I'm at, ultimately what I'm hunting for is, and I'm already sort of doing this behind the scenes, going above and beyond for early sponsors, winning those early true believers that might hire me in a different capacity or, down the road or even immediately around the corner, continue working with me in a sponsorship capacity. But then there's also the need to capture the story, the case study, the proof for other sponsors, right? Because I find that a lot of the people I'm working with, it's, B2B is a very small community relative to, name a consumer goods industry or consumer at large. A sponsor of somebody who is talking about, you name anything here, if you're consumer facing, it's almost like any consumer facing company that's like vibe aligned with you could sponsor you. For me, it's like, okay, from these two, I can go to here, here, here. Like the nodes are very clear for where I could go and say, like, I worked with either a competitor of yours or I worked with somebody you admire, and here's what they said and here's what I did for them. Like the case study is so important for me to like set that up ahead of time. So I totally see how like that pre-contract stuff and immediately after can all lead to that outcome for me.
This is why when I hear a newsletter operator or a podcast, host or something say like, oh, it's so saturated. There's so many like people doing this and like ad rates are being depressed on, podcasts ads and CPMs are down and like all this stuff too. I smile and nod, about this type of stuff because I can shout this stuff from the rooftops. I can say it over and over, and I can talk publicly about it and all this stuff too. People they just don't do it. They just don't take action. They just want to concentrate on their own creative pursuits, and they do not want to do these kind of extra things that will absolutely differentiate you. And so even if the rates that you're charging for your partnerships is 5x what these other people are, oftentimes that may just be the reason. These extra touches that you're doing, that may just be the reason that they just keep it rolling with. We just want to keep hiring Jay every quarter, every year, because it's just I share this anecdote all the time that like my wife and I, if you looked at our metrics, our like viewership, our reach, right, on the internet, we are literally at the lowest we've ever been. And yet we're making the most amount of money on sponsorships because they know these agencies, these brands that we've developed relationships with over 10, 15 years, basically, they know that every time they come to April and Justin, they know the product that they're going to receive. Professionalism, communication. We're going to hit every talking point with aplomb. There's going to be virtually no revisions. There's going to be, it's going to go live on time. There's not going to be any errors in how we post the coupon code. The link's going to be clickable. Everything is going to be great. Oftentimes, like that, they value that than like getting an extra 30% reach on the post.
I'm sort of kicking myself, although I'm excited for another crack at this because like to marry a couple things we've talked about, you were talking about earlier, like there are certain things I'm good at that I'm known for or that I'm doing behind the scenes even, which look like consulting and speaking and event-like stuff that I can roll into this, right? So we talked about that, and we're also talking about the success that they need to have as a sponsor for continued upside for me and for them, right? The win-win-win scenario. And, if you're selling something very expensive, a service or an expensive product, it's unlikely that a sponsorship with me is going to drive like direct sales, or maybe not even direct measurable leads. But, what's to say I couldn't bundle, hey, you're trying to reach, I don't know, like you're trying to reach leaders of content teams in-house at brands. Okay, lots of them are my friends, lots of them follow me and read me and listen to me and all that stuff. So rather than just sort of like blast stuff out at them, and also rather than give a discount code, why don't I bundle together as part of the next package? I'll host a series of roundtables where I'll bring together these people at the pinnacle of their field, all these content leaders that you now reach as a sponsor, and you are basically sponsoring us getting together. We'll shoot some content, either if it's in person or virtual, and I can do a series of those. And like, that's the kind of stuff where the muscle memory I have allows me to deliver that at a very high level with very low stress. Whereas somebody else would need to like drum up the contacts and, how do I MC something? Or how do I put this all together? And what do I do after it? That's at once like, it's something within my wheelhouse, and it's something that thinks about win-win-win versus, hey, do you want your like copy and links and logos to show up on my platform, and then I'll give you X number of custom deliverables, right? That's not at all where I want to go from here to scale this thing.
What are some big takeaways from the conversation, man?
I think the biggest of all, I've kind of hit on a couple times, is steering into the things that I'm already great at. Embarking on these little mini quests of understanding inside of an asset I'm already building. Like, why do I need to do all these custom things? Why not right within the content I'm creating? Let's do a mini series together or something like that. I'm already consulting and coaching and advising and speaking and emceeing things like, how do I leverage those skills and the perception and reputation I have around those things, but also the methodologies and frameworks and content I've built over the years around all that stuff too. Like putting that into and thinking less like sponsorship maybe and much more like partnership, right? What are the elements of the partnership? Well, there's like a classic sponsorship motion, and then there's these other things too. So that's a huge thing. And then also it just seems to me like I've got the basics, I've got like the big boulders going for me, and now I need to go in between those and figure out there's all these nooks and crannies where like, hey, the landing page isn't actually suited for my audience. And, or instead of giving me a % of lifetime sale from that, why don't you knock down what I'm earning and give a discount code? Like that's the kind of thing that allows me to like customize without it being just all net new assets I'm on the hook for. So they see a ton of value, but I'm not like just overrun with deliverables I'm on the hook for.
Love it, man. Hope for an awesome update from you as you build out the podcast, and good luck on the launch, man.